I want to welcome you back to Devex World, and I'm delighted to bring into the conversation David Malpass, of course, the president of the World Bank Group. David, it's great to see you.
Raj, very good to see you. Good to be with you.
Now, of course, there's so many issues we want to get into today, but one of the first that's on people's minds is the vaccine. And of course, there's a lot of talk in advanced economies about how quickly it will roll out. What we want to know is how quickly are people going to get access to it in low-income countries? This is something the bank and you have focused a lot on. You've got a $12 billion fund set up for this purpose. So when will people get access to a vaccine in the lowest income countries?
I hope some will begin in early 2021. There are quite a few steps. One is the logistics itself, so the cold chain and how do you deliver it. One is once you've started a vaccination program, what are the controls in terms of who gets it, and also whether you keep records of the delivery mechanisms. Those are all technical challenges, and then there's also the communications issue of encouraging people with regard to the safety and of the vaccine that the country has chosen. So I want to emphasize what we are doing is working on assessments, capacity assessments with countries right now, and then we'll be bringing to the board specific operations that will help countries finance the distribution chain and the mechanisms to actually get the vaccinations done. We hope to have some done early in 2021.
That's great to hear, and obviously the date is important in part because of the equity question. It's going to be a very stark reminder of how unequal the world is if you see people like yourself and myself living in advanced economies getting it so quickly and in a few months, and then others waiting a year or longer. But the other issue, of course, is the economic one, and I know you focused a lot on this, that we could be facing down the barrel of a really significant recession in a lot of low-income countries, ones that may be very tough to get out of. And so I wonder, when you look at the prospect for this coming year, how do you see it unfolding in terms of the economic challenges facing these low-income countries due to the unprecedented pandemic?
Well, it's a grave challenge. Poverty rates have actually gone up in the world over the last year. The COVID recession or depression is intense, and it's especially unequal because it's hitting people in the poorest countries the worst. Coming back to the vaccines, what we've wanted to do is provide fair and equitable access for people that don't have other access. And so that we're hoping we will be able by the end to have vaccinated 1 billion people. So that will help with the economies, because COVID still hangs over the economic outlook, including, for example, the tourism outlook, also the remittances outlook, which is so important for a lot of the developing countries, and the workers that they may have that are outside their borders are having themselves trouble having jobs and sending money home, and so that's a big challenge that I hope will come together as the advanced economies reopen. Those
Yeah,
are all
it's almost a perfect storm of remittances, tourism, and the export market for commodities that are hitting a lot of these low-income countries. I understand you were just with the G7 having these kinds of discussions, and I wonder, is the world prepared to really step up in a big way? What we're hearing and reporting on at Devex is it looks like the advanced economies are still very focused on their own circumstances. We've seen the UK talking about dropping their commitment to foreign assistance down to 0.5% of their gross national income. Here in the US, the Biden administration is coming in, but with a divided government, it's not clear whether external aid will be a big priority. So more eyes, I think, will focus on the World Bank Group. And I wonder whether the World Bank Group is really prepared to step up in the way the world may be demanding now.
Certainly the World Bank is, and I made that point the G7 finance ministers and central bank governors met on Monday, and so we had a good conversation, and there was a lot of conversation about the developing world, including the poorest countries. So each of the finance ministers mentioned the challenge of the debt facing the poorest countries and ways to provide relief There was a bit of look back on the year. That in 2020 there's been some success, but I think more steps still needed in terms of debt relief. I was able to make the point that the World Bank in calendar 2020, this year, 2020, has been a record year for the World Bank, and it's up 2/3 from the previous average. So this has been a big surge by the World Bank.
That's in terms of the amount of money you've been able to get out the door, right?
That's commitments and money out the door. A big surge that meets the COVID response. I think that's not always properly characterized in the press and so on, in part because there's a lag, meaning it's been a rapid ramping up that we started in April, and that's been very successful. And it's particularly important, the IDA contributions to the FCV countries, fragile conflict violent states, has been substantial and is continuing, and we'll be able to keep that up in 2021. But the advanced economies also have to think about resources in terms of using the multilateral institutions. Now, good news, you mentioned the UK. They'll be the G7 presidency next year, and they've given some confidence, substantial confidence, that their commitment to the World Bank is large and will be continuing. They were the biggest funder of IDA in the IDA 19, and they continue to have a major commitment through the World Bank. And can I give a little bit of a sales pitch? The World Bank and IDA in particular allows, by having the programs in one place, it allows the donors to put money into one pool that they have a lot of say in how it's allocated, in the quality of the programs. So it reduces fragmentation. Sometimes if you have many programs operating from different donors, a lot of it goes into overhead. So IDA's been able to keep down the overhead, and therefore is a good destination for these contributor funds.
And I think one reason you're making that sales pitch, if I understand it, is you've called for the donor governments to provide an additional $25 billion sort of top up to IDA because you had to accelerate the spending so much due to the pandemic. Is there any indication yet whether that money is forthcoming?
That wasn't discussed at the G7, other than the general support that they have. They represent major shareholders of the World Bank, and their view will be important. Also, the G20 as a whole. So in general, there's been support for more resources for IDA, given it's a 3-year funding cycle, and we're doing more than a third, much more than a third in this first year, this fiscal year, which is ongoing. And so if we don't have more resources, then there would have to be a letdown in some of the subsequent years. So this will be an issue for discussion with the donors. So far, the reception has been pretty positive. We're just this month, later in December, making the case to the IDA deputies on why the resources are needed and how they could best be raised. One point I'll make is that the grant element is very important for the poorest countries. What's most valuable to them by far is the grants that come through this IDA program. So if we can get the donor countries to recognize that and contribute actual new money, rather than the borrowed money that IDA is also supplementing itself with, that will go a long way in the poorest countries.
And one reason that's particularly important right now is there's real fear of a debt crisis in some of the low-income countries. We saw Zambia already was the first to default. Is your sense there's going to be a wave of these coming? And what should be done about it? I know China is a major player in this space, having provided a lot of debt to these countries. And of course, there's a lot of private sector debt as well, which has yet to be kind of changed in terms of terms, repayment terms. What's your feeling about what needs to be done right now on debt?
Even before COVID, there were quite a few countries in debt distress. So it's been fortunate that the G20 began working on it, and DSSI, the program, was able to allow countries to defer their payments on some of their debt. It hasn't gone far enough. It was a stopgap, and so we're now looking at ways to have actual debt relief. One key aspect of that, because China is one of the big creditors, is the interest rates that are charged, or the concessionality or grant element that is in the rescheduling process. If that can be increased, then countries can get over this debt distress period and begin to attract new investment.
So in other words, just to say this plainly, in other words, if China is charging 7 or 8% on a debt instrument, maybe they can restructure it and reduce that to 2 or 3%.
Correct. And that has huge benefit for the long run for the country, because then they can go to other investors and say, look, our debt payments into the future are going to be lower because we have more concessionality in our debt. But currently in Ecuador, the China restructurings had over 7% interest rate, even on the new contracts. And so that's a big challenge because the poverty rate has gone up. Same in Angola has over 6% interest on the Chinese debt. So a step that China can take, and I really want to emphasize, the private sector creditors really need to step up. That means the banks, syndicated loans, that means the Eurobond market, and China's commercial creditors. They're all an important part of this and need to find a way to have actual debt relief for these countries under distress. Otherwise, you get disorderly defaults, which are extremely harmful to the poor, to education, to health, to children, to nutrition.
This pandemic, the debt issue, the relationship with China, these are all critical issues on your agenda in the coming year. Another critical issue on your agenda is climate. And of course, the largest shareholder of the World Bank, the United States, is going through this presidential transition to an administration that has climate as a really high priority from one that had seen it as more of an ideological issue and really pushed back against it. How does this change things for you at the World Bank? You have to balance, of course, the interests and demands of all your shareholders. When you think about the climate crisis, will we see something different now at the World Bank? More a change in tone or a change in investment strategy? Is there anything we should be expecting based on the move to a Biden administration?
The World Bank was already very active in this. This year has been a record year for the World Bank in terms of providing climate co-benefits, and we're in the process now of increasing the goal for climate co-benefits over the next 5 years. So versus the last 5 years, we'll go up from some 26% up to 35% over the 5-year period. That means embedding within our programs the climate aspects, and what I said to the G7 on Monday, and we're making this point to the climate summits that are coming up, that the World Bank will work on Paris alignment through our programs by helping countries work on their NDCs, which are their connection to the Paris Agreement. A key issue in this is also actually reducing greenhouse gas emissions. That's somewhat separate from the climate co-benefits targets that have been done in the past. And so one of the things I hope that we can do is actually have outcomes that reduce the greenhouse gas emissions of countries and monitor them somewhat around the world. There's a huge amount of spending. The World Bank spending is the biggest multilateral financer of this kind of investment, but it's not exactly aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So I think we can do the two simultaneously. Climate adaptation, for example, for the poorest countries, but then also helping monitor the greenhouse gas emissions for all countries and try to identify ways that can be reduced. That means coal, for example, can be reduced as a source of electricity, even for all of the countries, which I think would be a big step forward.
That certainly would be. And this coming year is going to be a dramatic year in global development. It's going to set the tone for whether we can achieve the SDGs. what's going to happen with the vaccine rollout and the pandemic. Thank you for taking so much time to be with us at Devex World. These are all stories, of course, we're going to continue to cover, and we wish you and your colleagues at the World Bank Group all the best as you try to tackle these challenges.
Super, Raj. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Thanks.